Thanks, Brownie. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all back, and sorry for the bit of a wait time in between sessions, but we're back on track now. So I'm just going to open the slideshow, and hopefully that works really well. It won't be a moment. Okay. All right, we're ready to go. So I'll just start that again. Welcome back, everybody. It's really good to see you all. It's an exciting session tonight, which is covering off the ego. So we're going to have a look tonight at the ego, how it came about, what it is, how it's hijacked the higher self, but not just the higher self, but all levels of consciousness. So what it is, the role it plays, the interactions of the ego, the group ego, and of course, as always, some tools to help you move forward with it. So this is just a little quote. To understand the ego is to recognize its role as a necessary illusion, a tool for navigating the material world, yet a barrier to the spiritual realms. So what exactly is the ego? The ego is not simply the self we know in daily life. It's a multidimensional structure forged across all levels of consciousness. It's a complex construct of identity and self-awareness that plays a vital role in the human experience. It's the sense of I, the identity that you believe to be yourself. It's the labels that you give yourself, like I'm a parent, I'm a healer, I'm successful, I'm unworthy. Allowing these labels to define you in those temporary roles, because as we know, everybody, every vehicle that we take in or go into each lifetime is a role that we play. It is a very necessary part of us to be able to embody the human experience. But to truly understand our spiritual journey, we must first know the ego's nature, its origins, and its roles in the evolution of the soul. So the ego is born. We know that all souls emanate from the one on infinite source, a field of pure consciousness. Each of us is a fractal of that source. From this oneness, there came a great outbreath, a divine impulse, eventually resulting in a descent into density for experience, for self-knowing, evolution, and expansion. So souls could immerse themselves in the illusion of time, space, duality, and limitation, all of which would serve as a ground for spiritual growth. So in the early phases, humans lived in close harmony with their spiritual origins, embodying a natural connection to the divine. However, to function within the density of this earth, a new mechanism was required, something to mediate between the eternal soul and the temporary material form. And here the ego was born. So it was created as a necessary interface between source and the material world. In the beginning, it functioned as a psychic boundary, providing the soul a sense of individuality, which meant it could learn to choose, to discern, and to engage with the density of form. It could exist in and experience duality. It started off as transparent and cooperative, a tool for the soul, a tool for the higher self, listening to the inner quiet guidance of spirit. It worked with all aspects of the subtle bodies, keeping the connection open to source. But over many incarnations, something shifted. So as the soul engaged more deeply with matter, the ego began to identify with the body, the name, the story, and the experience of the outer world. It gradually began listening less to the guidance of the creator or our higher self, dimming that inner knowing, whilst at the same time increasing the senses, the sensory side of ourselves, until it became dominant. Eventually, the ego became tethered to sensory input and extended external validation. It began to see itself as the center of reality, a once functional identity working in unison morphed into a false sense of self, a construct that believed it was the whole self. So here we can see the shift from a alignment of all of our levels of consciousness into the ego over many incarnations, then becoming the dominant force within us. It wasn't an overnight thing. It happened gradually. So in this state, the ego no longer recognized its origins in spirit. It saw itself as autonomous, separate, and in control. It became seduced by power, control, fear, and desire. Instead of accessing wisdom from within, it now sought knowledge from without. Instead of flowing with the current of source, it attempted to steer the ship on its own, creating the illusion that it was the voice of source. This was a moment of great forgetting. It was a self-imposed amnesia of the ego, believing it no longer needed the soul, the higher self, or the creator. We essentially hijacked ourselves into a false sense of importance. So this distortion, where the ego got too big for its boots, is depicted in many ancient teachings, and here's just some of them. So in Gnostic law, a false god born of Sophia declares, "I am God, and there is no other beside me." This is the voice of the ego mistaking itself for the whole. And if we have a look back through history and the different gods that have been present on earth, claiming to be gods present on earth, you can see the characteristics of the ego in full swing. In the biblical analogy, the fall from Eden represents humanity's shift from unity with the divine, from utilizing that inner connection with source, taking guidance from it, into self-will, pride, and separation. In the Huna teaching, the ego forms when the conscious self forgets to work in harmony with the inner child and the higher self. Instead of acting as a bridge, it begins believing it is separate and in control, creating the illusion of an isolated self. So as the ego asserted itself more strongly, it began to construct a worldview rooted in duality. So then we take on the characteristics of me versus everyone else, us versus nature, good versus evil, mine versus yours, and so on and so on. And the illusion of separation became the ego's fortress and its prison. The soul, still quietly present beneath the surface, remained tethered to the divine, but its voice was dampened. Intuition was dismissed as fantasy, synchronicity ignored, and spiritual yearning misrepresented as anxiety, ambition, or despair. The ego feared vulnerability and did not want to give up control, so it shut itself off from the guidance of the soul. It built walls of logic, roles, identities, masks, and as each layer came on, it further obscured the truth of unity with the Creator. The more the ego resisted connection to source, the more isolated and threatened it felt. So this gave rise to a cycle of suffering, a restless search for meaning, for love, for fulfillment in external forms that could never satisfy the inner world. And we know that. We've all had our own experiences where we constantly look outside for solutions to our problems, for guidance in our spiritual journeys, or whatever it might be, but it just never quite hits the mark. And it's not until we actually go within and we quiet our minds and we listen for the guidance of source or our higher self that we find that that fulfillment begins to take place. So the suffering increased as we incarnated, and we incarnated into empires, into tribes, into religions, into nations. And as each incarnation went along, it created layer upon layer upon layer of the illusion. So when you look at these larger constructs, group thought forms were created, ones that rewarded conformity and punished deviation. And you know that, the story of the witches that got burned at the stake. Anything that was outside of the religious view at that period of time, these people were crucified. The ego bonds with these fields for belonging and power. It just further transferred authority from the inner self to outer sources. We only need to have a look at the religious structures that taught access to the divine source was possible only through an ordained representative of the church. And that, as we know from the history sessions, it's actually started a long before the churches came into integration, but in the early 1200s when Catholicism found its formation. We followed the pursuit of status, mastery, control, sometimes spiritual, sometimes material. And these pursuits created oaths and vows and bindings, either spoken or not spoken. Each one of those oaths, each one of those vows, each one of those bindings ties us in even further, strengthening the ego's position that it is in its power. So these acts sign over our decision-making process to egoic aims for security and superiority, again strengthening the illusion that the ego is the rightful captain. But it was never a mistake. So at first, the ego sheltered the soul, enabling it to engage with the world. But as consciousness evolves, it became the very obstacle the soul must transcend. So this is the sacred paradox. What once protected us must eventually be surrendered. So as the soul grows through lifetimes, learning, healing, and refining itself, the ego is gradually integrated rather than destroyed. It becomes transparent, no longer dominating the soul, but serving it. It returns to its original intent. This is the essence of the spiritual awakening, to live in the world with individuality, but without the egoic identifications. It's to remember the self beyond the self. Now, this journey is not linear. It's cyclical. The soul begins in unity, it descends into matter, and through many lifetimes, experiences, and lessons, it spirals back towards unity. Now enriched by all it has known, the ego plays a vital role in these cycles, acting as both gatekeeper and mirror, testing and teaching until the soul is ready to stand as a higher expression of the divine. All paths, all wounds, all wisdom ultimately return to source. Nothing, not one of your experiences, not one of your learnings, not one of your actions or reactions is wasted because it is all part of your journey. Every fragment of our experience feeds back into the circle, completing the sacred loop of separation and return, of forgetfulness and remembrance, of ego and of essence. Earth's not a prison, it's a temple. Humanity is not fallen, but is actually ascending, as we know. The ego is not our enemy, but it's the fire in which the soul is forged. So the ego isn't limited to just one area of our being. Many people talk about ego in the sense of the physical ego. We always notice, quite often over our lifetimes, we've noticed people who have a big ego, and that's all they know. But it's not just in this physicality that the ego takes effect. It weaves through every layer of who we are, shaping how we see, how we feel, and how we experience this physicality. What began as a functional tool for navigating the physical world gradually gained influence across all levels of consciousness. So we're talking here now about the subconscious self, the conscious self, and the higher self. It learned to mimic the voice of the higher self, assuming its authority, and convincing us that its fears, its desires, and its narratives are the truth, distorting the natural flow of divine guidance from source. Instead of the higher self leading, the ego positions itself as the decision maker, filtering intuition, amplifying emotional reactions, hijacking mental patterns, and disguising itself as spiritual wisdom. This created the illusion of separation, and it is also just one of the things that keeps us looping through cycles of survival, identity, and control. To come back into alignment, we must first recognize where and how the ego infiltrates each layer of our being. And by understanding its patterns across levels of consciousness, we begin to discern whether it is the voice of the ego or the voice of the higher self that we are hearing. So let's take a look. Just a quick recap on the levels of consciousness that we've covered off before. So we have the subconscious or the inner child. It looks after the emotions. It's instinctual. It looks after the physical body. It's habitual. Holds all of our memories. Conscious or middle self. It's the you sitting there. It's you listening. It's you making the decisions. It's you with the free will. It's you with the reason. And the higher self, our connection to source, offering that divine guidance and inspiration. These three parts of us, and they are only three of many, are designed to work together harmoniously in connection with the ego. So let's have a little bit of a look at how the ego actually has hijacked us. So when the ego becomes dominant, it distorts the life force flow and it creates arca cords which entangle. Arca cords are an energetic connection between ourselves, our three levels of consciousness, and also the outside world, others, situations, events, and so forth. And it misdirects the attention, effectively hijacking the whole system, our whole system. This results in confusion and separation from divine guidance and repetitive destructive patterns. It's subtle and it's layered. And it often gives the illusion of self-protection, rational thinking, or even spiritual growth. Once the ego has gained control, it will defend its position to maintain its dominance, trapping you in the illusion and steering you away from the guidance of your higher self. The ego is a funny thing. Once it has control, then it's going to fight to make sure that it doesn't lose that control. So when we have a trigger or an imprint that carries fear or shame or unmet needs or strong desires, it stamps a charged image into the subconscious or the inner child. Repeating the loop of your thoughts or avoidances of an issue creates an arcanaut to a thought form. We covered off how thought forms are created in the last session, 2 sessions ago. So when you have a thought that is charged with emotion and you have intent behind it, it creates that thought form. And these arca cords get attached to that thought form, further strengthening it. So once these arca cords are created, they become entangled around the theme of your thought. And it can be a person, an outcome, a situation, or a memory. When you have constant focus, it keeps feeding the tangle to the point where it can now run itself as a compulsion or a fixed opinion. It now becomes your reality. You then consciously start rationalizing the pattern. I have to do this, or that's just who I am, or I'm justified in this because of. So now your conscious self is jumping on board, influenced by the ego. So all of a sudden, whatever that situation is, you start to feel guilt or resentment or shame, confusion, which then clouds the ability to receive any higher guidance. Your prayers become conflicted because your feelings don't match your wishes. So your intent is not behind your request. When your prayers are not answered, or there is no clear pathway forward, more anxiety is created. Again, feeding the tangled arca cord and thought forms. So this whole process keeps you in a self-sustaining loop. The ego has you just where it wants it. It's in control and it will do everything it can to keep you there. So we're going to just have a little look now at how the ego infiltrates the levels of consciousness. And we'll start with the subconscious or the inner child. So the ego feeds on fear and doubt and pain. And the more we attach to that, the further we move away from the truth. So when you have an emotional overcharge, you've got intense feelings coupled with vivid images around a situation or a person, you lock trauma into the physical and the subtle bodies. So the ego works with the inner child to sometimes misrepresent events and then puts in rules for survival. So when you have a trauma or you have a situation, you come up with these devices or these rules that is going to protect you from being hurt if you should you face that situation again. So this is where the rules for your survival are created, and they're created by the ego. So the thought forms become embedded in your subtle bodies, and the aqua cords are attached to those people and events, which are then linked to your rules, often misguided by the ego. So the more you think about these people or events, the more life force energy you give it, which then maintains your defense and stance rather than directing that energy through to healing. So how does that manifest in our lives? What do we look out for? Have a look for reoccurring self-sabotage sessions, quite often after you've made progress. We've all got that saying, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. In essence, you are self-sabotaging your progress. You find that you've got coincidental obstacles. You act against your better judgment. I knew better, but I did it anyway. Often just from being on autopilot. Your ego is directing you into this because it knows by keeping you in that loop, then it maintains control. You have compulsive and reactive emotional responses to people, situations, or triggers. Or you find yourself visiting the same lesson over and over, or situations present themselves often larger than the last one, but you keep looping into the same responsive pattern. So what can you look out for? Your body will tell you. You might experience that gut feeling, like a rock in your tummy, a clenched jaw, shallow breathing when a topic arises. You might have repetitive dreams tied to the same thing. You'll be pulled towards people or situations you rationally know aren't healthy. You can't hold a clear prayer picture. It's distorted, fuzzy, or vanishes completely, and your focus just isn't there. Or you might have a strong reaction to certain people followed by fatigue. So that's the subconscious or the inner child. So let's take a look at the conscious self. So when the ego is in control of the conscious self, you find yourself rationalizing situations. The mind will build clever stories to justify the subconscious reaction. So your automatic reaction to situations is now justifiable in your own mind. You have the belief that you are in charge, when in fact you are subtly serving the subconscious programs which are being run by the ego to keep you in that control loop. You find yourself again in the same loop, constantly being pulled into similar situations, quite often with just a different face on the outside. Your self-worth becomes attached to the roles you play, your beliefs, your achievements, or what you own. You find over-analysis replaces inner knowing, and decisions are filtered through fear and not intuition. And how does that look? So some of the things that will manifest because of this is that you analyze everything, but you can't make a decision, or you can't take action that will give remedy or closure, redirection or progress. You become a perfectionist, but not just a perfectionist in its true essence. It's with constant self-criticism. You break small promises to yourself, or you may find it difficult to follow a routine that will give you some progress. You find yourself getting defensive when your beliefs are challenged, and you can't hear another person's point of view. You use spiritual language to bypass real emotional work. So you walk the walk, but you don't talk the talk. You might say, I've dealt with my anger. In fact, your frequency is the frequency of anger, of which people can feel. So what can we look out for when the ego has hijacked the conscious self? Become aware if you are having debates in your self-talk. Quite often, you'll have lots of should-dos, must-dos, have-tos in your dialogue. But not only will you have those discussions, you will have a debate with yourself about the should-dos or the must-dos. You become defensive when given feedback and quick to explain yourself, but you do, again, find it difficult to listen. Blame is often projected onto others, and that's not doing the internal work. You collect spiritual tools, but you rarely apply them. and you have difficulty trusting yourself. So you continuously question your decisions. So these are all the things that you can look out for. As we know, the levels of consciousness, they all make up us as one. So these signs to look out for and these things that happen really go across all our levels of consciousness. It's just easier to break it down so that you know sort of which part that you're going to be dealing with if you notice these different things happening in your life. Now have a look at the ego and the higher self. So when the ego hijacks the higher self, quite often, if you are getting divine guidance, there's a pressure that sits behind it, a pressure to achieve, a pressure to succeed, or you might feel an urgency to awaken others in their spirituality. You find that you use spiritual concepts, wisdom quotes, and language to appear enlightened, but again, you don't do the inner work. There's a sense of specialness and that you are more awakened than others. There's over-identification with roles like I'm a healer or a teacher or a guide, allowing those roles to define you. And there's internal stagnation is masked by outward displays of spiritual knowledge. In essence, you're tricking yourself in believing that you are far more advanced without actually having dealt with the things that you need to. So how does that manifest in our lives? Sometimes you might feel a calling to a bigger mission without integrating the healing of yourself and the knowledge. You take on a savior role in the spiritual realm rather than respecting that each has their own journey. You love to be validated or admired for your awareness and are happy to let others know how aware you are. You might tend to avoid vulnerable situations and bypass discomfort from doing the shadow work. In other words, you're avoiding dealing with your own trauma, with your own lessons. You turn away from painful situations rather than embracing them as a period of learning and growth. When you actually start to travel down that spiritual road and you find that a lesson comes along, it is something that you embrace. You actually look forward to coming out the other side of it because you know that you created this for yourself to learn, to integrate whatever it was that you need to from that situation. It's an embracing of your journey rather than a turning away of. The ego will distract you from that and help you to avoid those painful situations rather than moving forward from them. The signs to look out for. Messages that you receive, as I said before, will come with a sense of urgency. It might be tinged with pride. It might be tinged with fear of being wrong or a need to be seen. Your energy feels heavy or blocked. Gratitude feels forced rather than embodied. In other words, if you are giving gratitude with something, you are not feeling it from the heart. It's just words. Your meditation and your prayer feel flat or distorted, unfocused. Doubt or fear overrides the guidance that you receive, and you may feel cut off and doubt your intuitive messages. So these are all of the signs to look out for across every level of your being when you are looking and doing ego work. It's really important to remember that even though the ego created the illusion of separation from source, we must integrate that the separation was always part of the soul's plan. It's a stage in the sacred cycle of evolution. It was an illusion, a necessary journey to awaken the soul through contract, through lessons, and the experience of duality. So in essence, the rise and the overreach of the ego becomes the very thing that compels us to remember. It's like a pressure cooker. It gets to the point where the material life attachments the ego has created is no longer enough. So the ego, which has taken us furthest away from source, is also the very thing that sets the stage for our return. The pain of separation becomes the catalyst for awakening. The illusion of control eventually collapses under its own weight, and in the cracks, the light returns. So we're going to move now into something which isn't quite often talked about, and that is the group ego. So at its core, a group ego is a shared identity construct created when multiple individuals align emotionally, mentally, and unconsciously around a shared belief, identity, or cause. So where the individual ego creates a sense of I, a group ego forms a collective sense of we. But this we is not the true collective consciousness of Source. It's an illusionary identity structure formed through shared conditioning. Invisible threads of connection form between people, and when enough cords bind tightly together, a tangled energetic network forms, developing its own momentum. Repeated thoughts, emotions, and energies over time creates a feedback loop, eventually turning into a collective identity. So we can look at this as a creation of a thought form. It grows stronger. So the more cords that are attached to that thought form by each member of the thought group, the more each member of a group validates the ideal of the group, the stronger it becomes. The stronger the emotional charge becomes, the denser the thought form. You may find that these thought forms in areas such as political ideologies, religious dogma, us versus them type scenarios, and so on. It can be anything really. As the thought form becomes self-sustaining, it begins to protect itself by rejecting ideas that threaten its survival, just as the individual ego does. It thrives on power, and it doesn't want to let it go. In the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the archons are described as mind parasites influencing humanity through collective beliefs, especially fear-based ones. Group egos tend to mirror this pattern. So when you share emotional experiences with others, an upper cord forms between your subconscious and theirs, your inner child and theirs. Single cord is natural, and it allows you to feel empathy and compassion. But when many of these cords bind tightly around a singular energetic imprint, such as trauma, shared outrage, or ideological passion, this is when the dense network forms, and it becomes an energetic container which has the potential to weaken your individuality. It is the very reason that group egos are magnetic. Your inner child literally connects into that energy web. Part of your life force flows into the collective field. It's attracted to the sense of belonging that a group ego provides. And at that point in your life, the resonance with that group ego is matching. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a part of it. They require sustained energy to survive. And that energy can be found from emotional fuel, anger, fear, outrage, pride, shame. When the emotions become heightened, the energetic charge becomes amplified, and it further solidifies the group ego. Attention and focus. The more you talk about, more the group talks, shares, obsesses about an idea, the denser the thought form gets. The us versus them division. Group egos thrive on polarity. They create external energy enemies to sustain their identity, adopting a we're right and they're wrong kind of mentality. This strengthens the sense of power and righteousness, feeding back those feelings subconsciously into the members. One of the most painful aspects of group ego dynamics is how genuine love, compassion, and understanding can be morphed into control. So at the start, there's often an authentic connection between people, sharing these ideals on many levels. But over time, as the group ego strengthens, love becomes conditional. You start to hear phrases like, we love you, but. Quite often, members will reframe events to suit the narrative that they have. They will even go so far as to question the sanity, the memory, or the intentions of the individuals who are external. The higher self's unconditional compassion is replaced with subconscious survival-based bonding, masked as compassion. And again, remember, the ego is all about control. And once the conscious mind surrenders its alignment with the higher self, love collapses into dependency. So here's just a little look, a little table which can show you how a person's personal ego merged into a group field can exhibit behavioral changes. So the aspect of yourself that is autonomous before the group thinks, feels, and acts from a personal discernment. After the group ego activation, decisions are influenced by collective emotional ideals. And empathy. Before, have a balanced understanding of others. After, empathy becomes conditional on alignment with the group. Critical thinking. Beforehand, you were willing to question beliefs and perspectives. After, there's reduced discernment, unquestioned acceptance of group truths. There may be even some instances where you're in a group dynamic and you've come to an agreement on something. One or two of you may have a different idea. Ultimately, that gets discussed, but the same ending is arrived at. Throughout that process, there is a sense of maintaining your individuality because you may have brought up some points that didn't necessarily agree. But what you tend to find is that that whole process is then weaved around and it comes back to the original idea of what the group had. So your identity before the group, defined by personal experiences and inner knowing. After the group ego activation, your identity merges with collective identity. It becomes then the we over the I. You use we much more than you use I. And the aspect of accountability, you were practicing your own personal thoughts and actions. And after, it became blame onto outsiders or dissenters, those who do not agree with your view. So energetically, the individual's conscious self is overridden by collective thought loops, while the subconscious or the inner child links into the emotional energy of the group. The higher self then often becomes disconnected, resulting in distorted perception. But it's very difficult sometimes to realize that you are caught in a group ego. It will do everything it can to keep you entangled because it feeds off your energy to survive. That's how it exists. You often think that you are exercising your free will, but there's subtle signs that indicate when your energy is merged into a group ego's field. So let's have a look at those. Cognitive signs. You feel defensive or triggered when the group beliefs are questioned. You use we far more than I in identity statements. Contradictions that are rationalized to protect the group narrative. Your emotional signs. You feel a sense of belonging tied to the emotional charge, the emotion of it, not the group itself. You feel guilt, shame, fear, or if you're thinking of leaving. You may experience emotional spikes when confronted with opposing views from the group. Hence the reason that we just talked about, quite often, if there is some deviation to the discussion of the group, it will then wind its way back into the original thought. The energetic signs to look out for. You feel drained after engaging with the group. You experience pressure in the solar plexus area, and your attention is often pulled back towards group-approved narratives. Your spiritual signs to be aware of. You experience a reduced connection to the higher self. There is a loss of clarity in receiving direct guidance, and there is over-identification with collective missions or identities. So how do you get out of a group ego? Really depends on how deeply entangled you are as to the amount of work that you need to do. But it requires a conscious effort to disentangle at the mental, emotional, energetic levels. And the first step is awareness and observance. Observe your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors without judgment, and notice where your personal truth diverges from the group's narrative. Once you realize your entanglement, then you can do these visualizations to release your akasha cords, untangling them from the group energy web. You can use simple statements during your visualizations, such as, I return all energy that is not mine, and connect and call back all energy that is my own, purified, whole, and with love. Once this step has been completed, identify the personal unmet needs that drew you into the group in the first place? Are there suppressed emotions? What else has been affecting you that you felt that you needed to have that group energy as a part of your being? Go in instead of go out. Meditate daily to strengthen or reopen communication with your higher self. And listen for guidance outside of the group narratives. People who are outside of that group or a group have a much clearer picture of what is actually taking place. Because when you're inside, it's the same as your own personal personal situations. We cannot often see the wood for the trees when we are heavily entrenched into an emotional process. Once you step outside of that emotional process or that group process, clarity sets in. You can see what's been going on. You can see how things have been affecting you, and you can then take the steps to work on yourself. So regardless of whether this is your individual ego or this is a group, our ego, reclaiming your true essence, reclaiming your true connection begins with awareness. Once we see how the ego weaves its influence through our subtle bodies or our levels of consciousness, we regain the power to choose differently. And that's the very first step, is to recognition. Integration does not mean destroying or silencing the ego. It's about restoring its rightful role as a servant to the higher self rather than a false master. By learning to discern its voice, you dissolve the illusions and you realign with the natural flow of source. You open the way for deeper insights, for clarity, for purpose, and for peace. You start to actually walk your true path with a full connection rather than interruptions from the ego. So here's a little daily practice which some of you might like to try out when you're doing ego work or just to check in with yourself. Again, first step is awareness. Observe your thoughts and emotions and your body's reactions. Ask, am I coming from a place of love? Always. Or is this fear? Is it from a control perspective? Am I being reactive? What does that look like? Have a look inside of you. Go through your mental processes. Ask yourself the questions. Pause. Take a breath. Before you react, take a breath, give yourself a moment, and think about what you're going to say. Ask yourself, am I coming from a place of love? Practice witnessing yourself or others without attachment. Quite often it's easier to start witnessing or observing others without attachment because it's not you. But if that's going to get you started on that ability to be able to actually do that with yourself, then practice it that way. And then bring it back to you. Challenge your own narratives. Identify your ego stories. I must control this. I'm not enough for that. I'm not worthy to do that. I'm afraid to do that. Question the truth of it. Take 5 minutes a day and reflect on your day. Have a look at where you've actually either mentally or verbally expressed those kinds of narratives and replace them. Replace them with, I am whole. I am a part of the whole. I am worthy. I am enough. I don't need control over whatever it is. Release your attachments. Then notice what you cling to. Do you cling to outcomes of what you're going, the pathway that you're on? Do you cling to a status, a role, a title, or a possession? Do you need to keep up with the Joneses? If you notice these things about yourself, then you can let go of them with gratitude. You can do that inner work. You can affirm, I release what is not aligned with my higher self. Now, in saying all of that, what we're not saying here is that you don't have to not be comfortable. You can have a very, very comfortable life. The difference is that you are not clinging to those things. They now become an abundance in your life, not a must-have. You accept all of those things with gratitude, but they don't make your status. Start to align your subtle bodies. physical, doing mindful movements. You can practice yoga, tai chi, etc. And your emotional level, observe and release. And your mental level, contemplate your higher truths. Focus your mind and your intent on higher truths, not emotional ones. Release the loop of your emotional situations and start to ask yourself some questions about higher vibrational things. Meditate on the connection to your higher self and surrender and serve. You can affirm, I surrender my need for control. That's the ego's need for control. Act with compassion and reflect on your moments of egoic control and release them. So these are all things that you can practice on a daily basis to let go of your ego or to integrate your ego. So that brings us to the end of the slideshow. The ego is a very subtle part of our lives, one that most of the time we're not even aware exists or that we're working under. This is why it's really important to question ourselves on a daily basis, continuously, about where you are going from. Brownie's putting into the chat a meditation and an affirmation for you. I won't read through them. You can pick them up, and if you would like to do them, please go ahead. If not, that's okay too. That's up to you. But just know this. The ego has had control of our lifetimes for many, many of them. So it has got itself into that state of not wanting to let go, not wanting to release, and certainly not wanting to align with our higher self, have that connection flowing through all of us. Because it means then that our narratives, who we think we are, if we're playing that role of the victim, if we're playing that role of the perpetrator, if we're playing that role of the savior, then that identity to either people or events is no longer valid. If you recognize these things and that the ego controls each of those levels within us, then you have got a much greater chance of releasing the egoic control that we fall under, mental, physical, and spiritual. It's a journey. This session is actually really poignant for me. The last 3 months have been very challenging for me, as it has for many, many people. We are in challenging times. As the vibration rises of the earth, all of these things within us come to the surface, and they do that for a reason. It's so that we can deal with it. And once we deal with it, we integrate it, then we move on. Our vibration then rises. So when we've got trauma coming to the surface or challenges that we're facing in our lives, this is where you actually do the inner work. And the ego section of that plays a big role in it. Am I affected by something? Why am I affected by something? Why did what that person said have an effect on me? Is that my ego being hurt? How is that actually impacting on me? Where did my feelings come from as a reaction to someone else? Analyze yourself. Look at yourself from the perspective of who is in control here? Am I consciously in control? Or do I have some part of me that is just feeding that loop, bringing me back into a program, going around in circles so that it takes control and it keeps control? So more than anything, we know doing the inner work actually progresses you spiritually. It brings you to that higher level of consciousness. When you sit in that state, your life changes. Everything changes. The way you think, the way you speak, the way you interact, that you come from that place of love. Above all else, throughout your journey, no matter what happens in your life, know that you are loved. You're loved from every aspect of yourself. You have a higher love that comes through for you. Your journey is an expression of your self and the experiences which all feeds through to source. When you look at it and integrate it from that perspective, knowing that you are a part of the expansion of all that is, it becomes a beautiful journey, one that you know you are not doing on your own. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Kim. It's a lot to unpack with that, particularly the group ego. Listening to that, I'm consciously reflecting on how our groups interact. Yeah, like when you look at the things that we do here, we've got the Humanitarian Alliance group, which is our public group that has people from all different levels and walks of life. Then you've got the hug group as a whole that is function, I believe, at a higher level because of the journey. Then you have, as we saw today in our high-minded call, much even a higher functioning level of group dynamic. Um, so it's and then we all have our own little groups as well, family, and it could be a church group, it could be a social group. So they're all at different levels. And in my head, I'm going, well, I'm hoping that what we're doing is a positive group dynamic as opposed to one that is dragging people down and they're part of a group and they're not fitting in or they're not getting value from. I don't see the sense in and the challenges with family, right? With family, you can't choose them, but you can choose your groups. But I'm sure there are people who are in certain groups out of obligation, or that's just how it is. So it's just interesting listening to that, and I'm just going through the points, just going, is that us? Is that us? Is it us? Um, Hopefully it's not, but it's really it makes you think about what your role is individually and as in a group dynamic, how you impact people. The biggest thing about the chords, we know a bit about the chords now, and we know that every conversation, every interaction is creating those chords, and it's like, well, are those chords good connections, bad connections? And if they're not good connections, then you have to be mindful enough to, as they say, sever those chords so that you're not being stuck in a loop, uh, doing the same things over and over and over, or in that bad relationship where it's not going to improve because you've got those chords there and you can't break free to position yourself at a high level to make any changes in that relationship or that group dynamic. So yeah, it's pretty deep, pretty
It,
deep.
it's it's very deep, Brownie, and that's great that you do have a look at that. I just want to say to this, there are groups that work in alignment with a source directive, and the focus and the energy that goes into it is from a place of love. And that's the difference between a group that is working from that perspective and a group that has developed a group ego. So remembering that the group ego or a ego, doesn't matter which one it is, has gotten to the point where it is all about control. So when you see the dynamics of the group changing, or if the dynamics of the group changes, where all of a sudden the language changes, it becomes the we, but there is no individuality within that we. And the narrative of it changes. The expression from the group members change and the division starts to occur. That's when you can start to identify that a group ego is most likely either on its way or is already created. So one thing that I would like to mention with that, if you are working with the upper chords, is unhook them. If you sever them, you leave an end in you. It gives the ability to reestablish the connection between you and the person, you and the situation, or you and the thing much more easily. If you actually unhook it from you, or make sure whatever visualization it is, that you actually take it out of you, detach it from you completely, but not just cut it in the middle, for example. Just release it that way. It means that the ability to reestablish the connection is so much left, and it takes a conscious or sometimes subconscious process for you to go back into that situation and then reestablish that cord. So it's a little
Yeah,
more
and
difficult.
you're reestablishing at a much higher awareness and level because you're not stuck down at that previous level. You've had the opportunity to pull back and go, okay, I'm going to re-engage with that person
Yeah,
or that group, knowing that I see things a bit more clearer and I'm functioning at a higher level. So you're not
yeah,
sort of stuck. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
Because
And
I
the
mean,
two, no, you, and
no,
two,
I was
so, sorry, Brownie, you go, you go.
no, I mean, I just remember if we go back, 2 years ago, with the dynamics of the groups that I had back then, um, you know, my mentality, and this happened a lot for people in the whole COVID phase. We felt that we were the warriors and we had to save everyone. And as my wife would say, you got a Jesus complex. You're trying to save everyone, you can't. And I had to learn, and it was probably when I started the home group that I really started to learn to pull back from that and let people go on their journey and have no emotional attachment to an outcome. That to me was a real awakening because up until then I was trying to grab anyone and everyone along on the journey. But people come and go, and everyone has free will. Once you recognise that, it's easy.
I think all of us went through that process of feeling that need to wake people up and to get people on board and make them see what's happening, in the physical world and all of that kind of stuff. Yep, it was out. Come on, we've got to go. And why can't people see
Off to the
this?
next rally,
Why?
come on.
Let's go. Yep, kind of, all of that kind of stuff. There are people who are still stuck in that, and that's okay. That's their journey. There are people who have moved on from that, like yourself and your experiences where you come from. And when you actually do move on and you take that step back, you can see the very thing that you were talking about, Brownie. It becomes very, very clear to you what it looks like, how it comes about, where you were, how you've grown from there, where you are now, how you're moving forward. And you will have noticed, looking back, that your language changed
Oh yeah, yeah.
immensely.
Mm.
You will have noticed that rather than a sense of what you think is doing good for humanity is now, it's changed from that now to coming from that place of love.
Very much so.
And the dynamics and of the groups, the dynamics of the people that you attract into your life. Because as you grow, and this happens with a group dynamic that is working from the perspective of source, or integrating that source energy, using that source energy to move forward, those who are not in alignment, those who are coming from the egoic perspective, the frequencies change. So
Yes.
where you might have originally been like this, you can meet each other here, you've now started to do this because your vibration and the people that you're associating with, their vibration has elevated. And those that are working from the egoic perspective are here. And you will find that the separation happens naturally. They can no longer be around this.
Mm.
It's not that you can't be around this, it's that they can no longer be around this, be it individual or be it group, because the vibratory difference is too great. It becomes a natural parting of the ways. And that's okay. As you move through that journey, you find that your judgment is no longer there. You come from a place of, it's okay. It's their journey, be it individual or be it a group. It is what it is, and they're at where they're at. They will go through their own lessons to learn what this experience is about for them. And you being here looking in will know that when they start to go through that journey, and if they need help, you'll be there for them because you come from a place of love.
And that's the difference. And again, for a lot of us in that awakening journey, we're quite judgmental in that how can they not see this? What are they? They're dumb. What's going on? And I remember a common refrain probably about 3 years ago was like, yeah, I like to slap them silly. Just wait until they find out the truth. You know, now the whole dynamic's changed in that we recognise that we're there to be the helpmate and to raise them up when they fall and when they ask for help. And it's like everything in life, you can't help someone unless they're prepared to ask for help. But we're there. So this whole flip journey thing we're about to go through um, really is about our own preparation to be that shoulder to cry on, that willingness to help them and bring them up because they're ready then. They're ready
That's right.
to receive as opposed to trying to force something onto someone.
That's exactly right. And
Mm.
who are you, you know? And this is one of the things, like if you find yourselves in these situations, ask yourself, who am I to expect somebody to change their life journey for an idea that I might have?
Mm.
Who are you to do that?
Yeah,
Mm,
we've come a long way.
we have. Yeah.
Anybody else with a reflection or a question? It's a small group, so you probably don't need to put your hand up. Just to speak at Bill.
Christiane, does that bring you a little bit of clarity with the difference
Yeah,
between the ego and the subconscious or the inner child?
Yeah, so it's yeah, I was going to comment anyway. I was going to ask you a question. Would you say that if we learn detachment, then would that be able to help us identifying the ego and be able to manage it better?
Yes, because it gives you the ability to observe. Observe with clarity what is actually happening within your life or within other lives as well. You can see things a lot more clearer. So the more that you practice that detachment, it doesn't mean that you're not going to feel emotions.
yes.
Emotions are still important. Emotions are the remembrance key. For example, emotions are generally the remembrance key for experiences that you've had in the past. So if you went through a trauma previously and you keep revisiting that trauma, the first thing that comes out is the emotion that's attached to that trauma, and then the memory of it follows. So emotions are important for us. So even though you practice detachment, what it means is that you look at things, either yourself or situations or other people, from an observer view, not being clouded right in the middle of it, thinking that you're a part of this, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, or you've got to intervene, or whatever the case may be. You're like standing back here, having a look first. When you stand back here and you observe first, then you give yourself the opportunity to discern what's going on. It gives you clarity of where you're working from. Am I coming at this with love? Or am I coming at this with some sort of fear, some sort of control? What does that look like? What am I doing? How am I reacting? Those kinds of things. Does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was good with Brownie's sharing as well, because I'd say that in a group, like Brownie, you've been part of a lot of groups and you've managed a lot of groups. So I think even in your learning, you've probably seen dynamics of different people, how people react and things like that. It's much harder to really, manage the ego in a group as well, isn't it? That's
Well,
much, much harder, because then, as Brownie was saying, you learn compassion, don't you? Like, not coming from a place of compassion, you can really allow people to go through their journey and accept that what they're going through is, as you said, there's free will, and we can't really make them go to the next level unless they're ready. So
That's exactly right. I want to make a very important point on that too, is that if you notice that these things are happening in your group or whatever, and even though You come from the perspective of that is their journey, and you love that they're on their journey. It doesn't mean to say that you don't have to have boundaries. So if there are people in a group who are, say, you might like have a little offshoot of a group ego, for example, who are now starting to create issues and whatever, then you can deal with that, because that no longer becomes in alignment with the group. It has a very real ability to dismantle a group, but it doesn't have to. You can deal with that because it's outside of what the group represents. It no longer fits. They will eventually drop away anyway. However, what you don't need or want to happen is a complete disintegration of a group because of the actions of a few who actually are no longer in alignment with what it's about.
We're very lucky that in our groups we are, all, going towards the same thing, and we are all awake, and it makes things a lot easier. But I'm part of small groups that are not awakened, that I have to deal with, and I found that very challenging because they're not awakened, and you can't really share what you know, and you have to come to their level, and you have to work with them in a way that guiding them and really stepping back, allowing them to express themselves, knowing that you can't push too hard and you can't impose, the level you're at onto them, because they're not ready for that. So that's when we have to really exercise compassion, use compassion and a lot of patience.
That's really when you have to get control of your ego.
Yep.
That's exactly what it is that you've literally got to go, ego, you got to go park over here, because these people don't need it. They're on their own journey. Just you vibrating at that high level and being in groups which may not be aware or awakened, I'm talking from a spiritual sense here, you will, without needing to say or do anything, raise the vibration of the group anyway. The universe always tends towards perfection. So if there is a higher vibratory presence like that, then on some level of them, that vibration is going to raise on each of those individuals there. The impact that you have non-physically is far greater than the impact that you have physically.
So I'm learning a lot through it anyway.
That's great. That's really good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for today.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Sorry.
I'll say it's a bit like in Christiane can attest to this. We have our lunch every Friday on the Gold Coast, and we've developed such a beautiful tight group that when we're in that restaurant, the energy and the excitement and the vibe of the thing is so high that everyone can see that this whole group is like, wow, what is that? It definitely is has an impact as such.
It's really, you can just about pluck it out of the ether and feel it.
And I'd love to be able to see, and hopefully sometime at some stage soon, as we ascend, we can see each other's aura, and it'd be really cool to see, the group aura when we get together. That'd be so cool to see. Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts or comments or anything they wanted to share? I know Rose normally has a ton of thoughts. So Rose, could you speak?
Sorry, I was just waiting to pop in. In regard to the group ego, I thought you might actually find this fascinating. And when you reference the control aspect, in the South Island of New Zealand, there is a group based on the West Coast. It's called Gloria Vale. They are now, and probably the last 20 or 30 years, require their people to dress a specific way, to work in a specific way, to attend religious meetings in a certain way. to the point that if they leave the group, they're also disavowed from any family members of the group. And there is a lot of what I call rescuing going on in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, where they suddenly found what life actually looks like and not what life is within the compound of 20 or 30 acres on the west coast of New Zealand. So I thought you might find that fascinating because that's a very strong example.
Very good example.
Of what I call a group ego in that scenario. And then from there, I was also going to put forward, I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Have you heard of Florence Scovel Shinn?
Of what, sorry?
The book from Florence Scovel Shinn.
No.
Okay, you might find her work fascinating. Written
Yeah.
in the 1900s or 1920s.
Most of the good books are.
Yeah.
Florence, it was Florence.
Scovel Shinn.
Scovel.
Scoval.
Shovel.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Schovel, I think it is.
Mm.
Yep.
And there she puts forward the concept of non-judgmental acceptance. When you apply that to everything and anything, that allows you to step back and observe, because then you're not holding that sense of judgment on this or that requires your input because you believe you need to make comment on it. You step back and accept that this is what it is, and no judgment around that is required.
Absolutely. So, and what's really interesting, not just in a group ego dynamic, but also individual ego dynamic.
Yeah.
When there is judgment, typically there is anger. Judgment creates anger.
And anger is unresolved grief. When you dive down to the next layer of that.
Mm. Yeah.
So when you are angry, you have to go back to why am I angry? And generally you come back to a time in your life that you were so let down, so betrayed or whatever, that was what caused an emotional grief, and now as you say, things trigger and they come back and you deal with it with, as you say, blame or whatever to manage that outcome.
That's right.
Yeah.
All of your conditioned responses come to the forefront.
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah.
And that's, go back with the inner child work that people have done. So if you haven't done your inner child work at 40 or 50, you're still not too late to do your inner child work.
Never too late.
No.
Any time is a good time to start. Because
that's actually what helped to, I call it, I'm not sure if you heard the phrase maiden mother crone. Have you heard of that phrase? Okay. When you're heading into the crone is the era around 50, 55. You've lived the life of a single person. You've lived the life, in a relationship, so to speak. And then you're coming out to the other end with the wisdom and the knowledge. And, that's where you find balance, peace, harmony. You're no longer judging how you look. You're just accepting how you are, how you be, and this is me for who I am.
Love that.
So there's a lovely phrase made in Mother Crone, actually. And you probably might have heard the phrase cronies. Yeah, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put in my 2 cents here. First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. It's certainly an important topic. And one thing I just wanted to share was I've been thinking about when was it that I was able to get to know my ego, the most easily. Like, what was it specifically? And I remember now that what I found was when you get triggered, that's the ego really reacting. And if, like, I learned how to just give that moment a little bit of space with the breath, and then just sort of do an inquiry, asking into my body, what age are you? What part of what trauma are you? And usually it would identify itself. And then once that happens, there's like this opportunity, just as the adult, to love into that part of us that's still triggered. I just think of it as that part didn't have enough love. So that's just a little something that I have learned along the way.
And that's a great tool for others to take on board too. Thanks, Robert.
It's a strange thing, trying to figure out what part of me is ego. It's a bizarre inquiry, but if over time, it is possible. And I did it very late in life, so
Great. That's wonderful.
don't give up.
It's this whole thing with ego is interesting because Yvonne often says I'm a different person with the hug group, much more tolerant, much more compassionate than I am with the extended family, particularly the mother-in-law. It's just interesting because yeah, that's where the triggers come.
There are people that are put in our lives just to push the buttons.
Oh, thank you, mother-in-law. Yes.
But Brownie, that's to bring you back, but that's also called mirror work. And that's to bring you back to yourself to see why those actions trigger you, to find healing in those triggers.
Well, thank you, Rose, for that. I appreciate that.
So you love your mother-in-law for what she's teaching you, and thank you for being in your life.
Oh, do I have to thank her?
Yes, you do.
You get to.
I get to. What a lovely thing. I get to. Yes. I love it.
Well, if we don't have any more questions or thoughts or comments or anything,
I think we can wrap up the recording. So for those who are listening, thank you so much, and see you on the next call.